Yeah, so managing users and groups is on the Linux operating system. Yeah, how do you do that? Yeah, any user you are creating about it, yes, user the wise, the who is going to access that the system. Some set of properties that's required, right? Set of properties required. What are the properties that is required for the user which you're creating on the Linux system? Yeah, username is required. That is login ID. Username. Suppose Vagrant is a username. So which you are trying to use it as a login ID whenever we are connecting to the system. But that user is going to have that one unique ID. So on the Linux system, the user, I mean, we can say this is the user database. User database. If you're creating one user or if you're managing that users on the Linux system, all that users that will be stored in one of the file. That file we can say the database where all the users information are located. But what is the main attributes of that user is username, that is login ID, and each user is going to have that unique ID and this unique number, and that user is belong to the which group. Yeah, so as we are understanding this in the permission section, so any file that has been created by that user belong to that one of the group. Which group he belongs to that? Yeah, suppose one new member has joined to the project from the development team. Then he should access the development server. Then you need to create that user with login ID and with the yes ID of that unique number, and which group he belongs to now? Development group. And if you like to display some information about that user, yes, the comment section. That means if you like to add it employee ID of that the user or mail information of that user. Yes, if you like to add that some information, yes, you can use that, or we say that the comment section. Then that user, which type of the shell. So these are shell types are the very important. So which type of the shell he has to use it that. And finally, home directory location. Yes, whenever he logged into the system, what is the default home directory of that user? Suppose whenever we are logged into the Vagrant system, a Vagrant with that user, what is the default home directory of this user? User home directory. As we know that we in the initially directory structure, whenever we are understanding, home contains all the users directory. Now we are talking about the Vagrant user. Vagrant user home directory is /home/Vagrant. That means whenever I connect it to the system, whenever I'm accessing the system or connecting to the system, so what is the default home directory? So this is the home directory of the user. That is /home/Vagrant. But can I customize this home directory whenever I'm creating user? Yeah, we can customize it. Default is a /home and username. But whenever we are customizing this, yes, we can do the customization of the user home directories. Yeah, so in the comment section and shell type, which type of the shell and home directory location. Yeah, so these are some the major inputs of the user, or we can say the properties or attributes. Yes, user if you're defining is nothing but user is having a set of attributes, right? Username, user ID, and yes, which group he belongs to that, what is the information of that user, what is the shell type, what is the home directory. These are all the properties we say that. But where all that the user information that will be stored? is whenever we create any user on the Linux operating system, so where that user's information is storing that is in etc password file. Suppose if I go to the system and if we check it in the etc folder, so the file name is password file. But don't think that it contains the passwords, but file name is password. So this file contains all the user information. It is kind of user database file. But how the content will be if you just try to understand that etc password that file, as we are understanding that user's information is which user we are talking or we are using on the system is Vagrant user, right? You see that here Vagrant user is available. Also, we were trying to install some Jenkins software, and Jenkins user also has been created in the package management section. And you see this Apache is another user has been created as we have installed Apache service on the system. And you see that SH related one user is available. And as we are understanding the root user, yes, this is the root user. Yeah, all the users information in which file that will be stored, that is etc password. Suppose I need to search for this in the system, the Vagrant user, is it available or not? Yes, I can use it this file and go for the grep and give that username. Yes, in this file, Vagrant user is available. Or is it available Vagrant 1? No, Vagrant 1 user is not available. Yes, so this is the main database file to find that whether the users are available or not. And if it is available, what are the configuration that we have for that user? The instead of particles. Now if you see this like Vagrant, yes, the Vagrant user is available. And there are the properties. But all these properties, if you just observe that, which have been separated with colon. Already we are understanding this one in the cut command and grep command options. Yeah, so this is a login ID and this is the password in encrypted format X, and this is the user ID, this is the group ID, and here no comment is defined. That means no information is available. So between this column to this column, that is a blank, is nothing but that property is not defined. But what about this properties? Comment here. Comment. You can describe some information about that user, but it is not defined any information. And what is the home directory of this user is? Home Vagrant. Yeah, so there's whenever we log in with the user, so what is the default home directory? That is the home/vagrant. And what is the type of the shell which is used? That is a bin bash. So here just observe that some of the users, Vagrant user, what is the type of the shell it is having is bin bash. But in Jenkins, if you see that, what is the type of the shell which is defined is bin false. And Apache user, if you just talk it, what is the type of the shell it is defined is has been no login. So some of the users are having the bin bash, some of the users are having the no login, or some of the users are having the bin false. Why we have these options? This is very, very important. Thus I will conclude it, but just understand it. The user, whenever we talk it about it, user is having the set of attributes, one line in that password file, one user record, and that record contains so the test user I have created somewhere, maybe I'm not sure. Yeah, test is a username, and the next property is the encrypted format of the password of that user, and user ID, group ID, and user comment information, then user home directory, and the type of the shell of the user. Yeah, there are some set of attributes the whenever we are creating a user in Linux operating system. The etc password is a file and it contains the format username, password in encrypted format, user ID, group ID, comments, home directory, then type of the shell. Example which are mentioning just now. What is the root user? User ID is 0. Root user, always that's any system if you're going to access that. Root user is the super user, right? That root user UID is 0 and GID, that's a group ID, is also 0. And this is the root user home directory /root. Root user home directory is /root. And this is the background user. Like that, the each line in that etc password represents one user record. Yeah, usernames whenever you are defining that, yes, it should contain the less than 8 characters in length by convention, and case sensitive. Yes, user IDs are the case sensitive. Yeah, the recommended is a lower case by convention point of view. Yes, whenever you are defining that any user IDs, whenever you are creating that, recommended is use the lower case. And the numbers are not allowed in the usernames. Yeah, in the login user IDs, we should not to define that numbers, only alphabets. And do
Numbers
not use
are allowed, sir.
Yeah.
Not allowed or allowed, sir, numbers?
Sorry, numbers are allowed. I mentioned not allowed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, numbers are allowed, but special characters are not allowed. Like at the rate of backward slash or forward slash. The special characters are not allowed. Numbers are allowed. Numbers and alphabets are allowed. Okay, that's about username. The conventions whenever you are defining the usernames. So the lowercase is recommended, and they're all the case sensitive, and at least 8 length the characters that is use that, and don't use the special characters. And the passwords. Yes, whenever we set the password, etc password file, it is not going to store the password, but where exactly the passwords will be stored is we have another user database file, etc shadow. Here also password it doesn't show directly, it is in the encrypted format. Encrypted format password user to be stored in the etc password. etc password is readable by everyone, but now encrypted passwords actually that is stored in the etc shadow file, and it is readable only by root user, and it prevents users trying to crack the passwords. If we just observe the etc shadow file, so this should be available only for the root user. Yes, you need to use the sudo option. Now if you just observe the Jenkins user or Vagrant user or Apache user, yes, especially Vagrant user, we have set that the password. Yes, this is the password which is in encrypted format. And we have some other attributes like the when that password can be expired, and the retention times, and the locking period. Yes, there are some attributes which are available. I'll come back. But passwords are stored in the separate file, not in the etc password file. And what is the another file which is available? etc shadow file. Shadow file contains the user related passwords in encrypted format. And not only the password information, the expiry dates are minimum, maximum, and we have some attributes. I'll explain all these properties. And apart time point of view, when it was created, Yeah, there are some attributes are available. Yes. Another important file for that users management point of view, which we should remember is etc shadow. etc password is one file and etc shadow is another file. And as we're talking that UID and JID. What is the third and fourth attributes in the user attributes? UID and JID. This is also important, especially understanding that UIDs. The root account is always that UID is 0. Yes. UIDs are unique numbers. Yes, like for each user, it is going to assign one unique ID. But system accounts have user ID less than 1000. What is this point? What is the system accounts? Suppose in our users list, it is the password file or shadow file, especially password file whenever you observe that. You see that vagrant user who is having bin bash type of the shell. That means he can run that bash commands. So the type of the shell, what is the type of the shell which is different for the vagrant user? Bin bash. That means he can remotely connect to the system and he can run the commands. He is a login user. We are able to log in it. But here if you see to the Jenkins and Apache, Jenkins when it is created this user, whenever I install the Jenkins software, Jenkins user has been created. And whenever I install the Apache service, Apache user has been created. These accounts we will call it service accounts. Service Jenkins to manage it, separate user. Apache service to manage it, separate user. Or a Docker you are going to install it, separate Docker user. So internal services to manage it, that is a system accounts we can say that. These are all available only within the system, but you cannot use it for the login operation. We don't use the Jenkins username to log into the system. Suppose if I'm the DevOps engineer, I need to manage the Jenkins service on this. I need to start and stop the Jenkins Mac. But first of all, I need to connect to the system. Whenever I'm connecting to the system, we use it. We use it that about our login username and password. Log into the system. After login, to manage that service, that is starting and stopping of the Jenkins, I need to use the Jenkins username. So login purpose separate users and internal services management point of view, the separate service accounts we use it. So that's why you see that the service accounts which are having no login, that means you cannot log in with this username externally, remotely. But this user, when if I'm not able to log in with this user, then in which context I use it? Yes, whenever we run it, systemctl start HTTPD or systemctl stop HTTPD, background which user it is going to use it? Apache user. Suppose if you verify this netstat command, yes, 80 is running. If I verify the space icon here, grab HTTPD. Yes, my HTTPD server is running, but with which user account it is running? Apache user account it is using. So this service internal starting, stopping, those kind of process management point of view, the system accounts will be used. But these accounts we use it for the login purpose, login to the system and running the commands. Running the commands, I need to use a shell. What is the type of the shell which you are using? Bash shell we are using. That is, I will talk it in the more in the shell scripting. Which type of the shell normally which we use it? Bash type of the shell. So if you see this background user which is have the bash shell. Yes, I'm able to log into this account and I'm able to run the commands. But if you see this other almost all other accounts which are having the no login, that means I cannot use it this user log into the login purpose. But I can use it these users for internal services to start it or stop it. Are you clear about this point? The difference between system user account and a login user account. Login user account, what is the type of the shell? Bin bash. Yes, if you see this for that user, any bin bash, yes, we can understand that user can log in it. Yes, for the root user, bin bash. But remaining almost all the user accounts, you see that we didn't create it. Internal, whenever the services have been installed, it is created internal. And most of them, if you see this, no login. And vagrant user is bin bash. But remaining all here also test user also bin bash. But remaining all are no login. No login is nothing but you cannot use it for the and these are user accounts for the remote access. Are you clear about this point?
Sir, what about bin false shell?
Yeah, bin false is also the same concept. Either you can use it no login or bin false. These two types of the shells represents system account IDs. That means only you can use it internal in the system, but you cannot use it to access the remotely or to run the commands remotely. Both are the same. Okay, so here the point is system accounts have user IDs less than 1000. Where it is defined that the default configuration is in etc login.definition file. If you create it, the type of the shell with the bin false or the no login, then you see the account IDs which are having less than 1000. Less than 1000. But if you see this like bin bash type of the user accounts which are having that 1000 or greater than 1000. But root user account to default to 0. So even if he is the bin bash also, root user account is having the 0. But remaining all the accounts, if you see this account IDs which are having the less than 1000, these have been defined no login type of the shell. Yeah, that is by default system level it is defined. That is in the login definitions file. So if you are going to create a user with a no login option, if you're going to create a user with a no login option, then user ID, what is that user ID? It is going to assign that less than 1000. And if I say specify that any user with the type of the shell as a bin bash, then it is going to assign that user ID greater than 1000 or 1000 or greater than 1000 already using that the background user, right? Oh yeah, other the IDs which are available. Yeah, that is about user IDs. User IDs on the base of the system account type, or we can say account types. But what are the different account types are available? No login accounts and login accounts. Login accounts, you can use it. Yeah, normally like the person who has joined to the project. So he will be having the login user. But whether the development user or whether the DevOps engineer, we are going to work for the Jenkins server. Let's assume that. Both teams are using that. Yeah, Jenkins is a common user to manage that service, Jenkins service. But if I'm going to start it and stop it, I need to log in with my username and password to the system. Then we use the Jenkins user to manage that Jenkins service. Like the developer user, he's going to log into the system to manage the Jenkins. Then he has to log in with his username and password. And after login, if he would like to start and stop the Jenkins, he has to use the Jenkins user internally. Are you clear about this point? So how do you identify this in the password file? If you see that user ID or username, that user, is it a system ID or is it a login ID? How do you understand it, or how do you identify it?
ID less than 1000 is system account and ID greater than 1000 is login account.
Okay, but as an organization point of view, it has been switched that was go for that like login user IDs should be less than 1000, and a normal like a system accounts should be greater than 1000. If it has been
Yeah,
different,
a shell type. Based on shell type, we can
yes,
put it
that
like
is the best approach. Account ID is by default that is generating, but it can be customized. If you just refer this file, yes, you can suppose if you just talk it that in the etc login definitions file. Yeah, so user ID minimum, the which we have this 1000 for the normal accounts and maximum up to 60,000. And system accounts point of view, system user ID minimum 201 and maximum it is going to send a 999. These are default settings, but we can change it if it is required. Yes, as per about our application, if it is required to change it, yes, we can change it. But the default, there is a way is providing that. But instead of using these IDs, we cannot justify that is it a system ID or user ID. So recommended is type of the shells are the recommended. Is it clear about this point?
so, once you show this command, this shell, how you got this information?
Yeah, so this is login definitions file. Cat
Login.
etc folder login definition DFS defs. This file contains all this configuration and you can edit it and you can change it, but don't touch, normally not required. But just understanding the point of view is here you see that some properties. Yeah, password maximum days. Any user you are creating that, what is the maximum days that is going to have it? That password or minimum days. Yeah, password maximum day, maximum number of days a password may be used. Minimum number of days allowed between the password changes. That is the minimum days. Password minimum length, minimum acceptable password length, that is a 5 characters. And password warning age, number of days warning given before a password expires. Yes, before the password expiring that, it starts giving that warning. Was about your password is going to expire in the next 3 days, 2 days, 1 day. So when do you want to start that warning age? That is a 7. And minimum length of the password, minimum days allowed between the password changes. Suppose we have the policy format, every 30 days password has to be reset of that. Then you can set this in the login definition file, the password minimum days, uh, the minimum number of days allowed between the password changes, that is 30 days. If you define the 30 days, then the password has to be changed between that 30 days at least. And once it has been created, maximum days how many days the password may be used. Yeah, all these the default configurations whenever we are creating user and setting the password for that user, yes, it is going to read from this file. Yeah, password aging controls and minimum and maximum values for the automatic UID selection in useradd, or minimum and maximum values for the automatic GAD selection in the group adding time, and for that user creating home directory required or not. So default home directory is going to create it for that at any time whenever we're creating a user. But whenever we're creating a user with -m flag, we can override that the default user home directory is. And the password encryption mechanism, it is going to use the SHA 512. 512 is the strength of the password. 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 5 we use it normally 256 or 128 bit. But yes, here it is using that SHA mechanism 512. That is encryption, the bit strength. Yeah, it is going to use this algorithm to perform that encrypting the password, and encrypted password which will be stored in the etc shadow file. Yeah, this is the main the configuration file, that is login definitions file. Is it clear this point? Are you following everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good, 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 good. Okay, good. So let's move to this next GID. GID is another attribute, right? What about the properties of that one is? The GID is listed in the etc password is the default group for an account. That is a default group account of the user. Suppose, how do we know that the user information that user is belong to the which group, the primary group, and what are the like optional groups is? If I just run it one command, let me show that command. How do you know that this already we discussed initially? How do we that user information? What is the command that can be used to know that detailed information of that user?
ID like
Yes, ID. ID is a command. But which user information it is giving now? Current logged in user, that is a vagrant user. Yes, the vagrant user related information that is giving that. But what is that information? Yes, UID of this user and a login ID, group ID of this user, and which group he belongs to that. That is a primary group he belongs to that vagrant itself. Yes, any user you are creating that is nothing but that user by default he belongs to that one of the primary group. Suppose if I'm going to create like one the development user, maybe he's a prime. I mean, he this member is belong to that primary group is development. But sometimes maybe that user he's having that some expertization on like system management activities also, and we would like to give that additional permissions. That means additional group which would like to add it. That is something system admin group. So normally his primary group is development, but he should perform some administration activities also on the system, that is development system. Then what we will do that is we will add that user to the other group also, that is admin group. So primary group is development, but optional group or secondary group what we have this is admin group also. Yes, with one user we can add it to multiple groups, but he's belong to that one group is a primary group. How do you know that that user's primary group and that users related as other groups is? Yes, in the ID command. So whatever the GID which is showing that's a group is belong to the primary group. Now this user, vagrant user is belong to that primary group vagrant. But what are the other groups he belong to that? Yes, you can see that the other groups, but he is belong to the only one group vagrant. He is not belong to other groups. Or if it shows the vagrant and with the other something development group, that means this user is belong to the vagrant group and as well as development groups. But primary group is vagrant group. Yeah, so in that property, so etc password file, that user information if we check it, this ID is belong to that primary group ID. This ID is primary group ID. So in the etc password file, in the fourth attribute, it is going to have the primary group ID of the user. And this is actually user ID and this is the group ID. But if you don't know about this, the group ID, 1000 is belong to the which group? How do I know that? So we have to say another file which is going to keep that all the group names and group IDs. So what is a file that contains about the group's information is that is etc the group is the file and which contains, now you see that this is the group name and this is the group ID. So how do you know about it? Which I mean that suppose in the etc password it shows that user belong to the which group ID. So this is a primary group ID. But whatever is primary group ID, if you'd like to know that, you can directly run it ID with the vagrant. Okay, that is the best thing. Don't need to go to that group file and opening this. Okay, this ID is belong to the which group again. No, don't shut it with that ID and run with the user. Then you will get it. Okay, this is user. This user is belong to that this group, and this group ID is 1000. Now 1000 is the primary group, and what are the other groups he belong to that? He belongs to that only vagrant. Are you getting the points of this? Yeah, the GID listed in the etc password is the default group for an account. That is a primary group. New files belong to a user's default group. Suppose whenever you create the file or folder, suppose now this vagrant user created any file. Suppose if I create any file with this username, something test.txt, is it available? Maybe that is available already. Okay, fine, that's not an issue. Now if I check it, this test.txt. So who is the owner of this file? Vagrant. Yes, I have logged in with the Vagrant and I have created this file. That's why it is tracking that my who is the owner of this one is Vagrant. And what is that the primary group of this user? Yes, as it is defined, the primary group of this user is Vagrant. Yes, now the group is Vagrant group. So whatever the default group that shows in the etc password, that ID, so whenever he is creating any files or the folders, that group which will be, that's why we said that the primary group. Yes, whenever he creates any files or the folders, okay, so who is the owner? And that owner is belong to that which primary group, that primary group. And in this primary group, who are all the users are there? All the users are going to have these permissions. As we are understanding that owner permissions, group permissions, other permissions. Now, whenever the vagrant user created any files of the folders, as he is a owner, he is belong to this primary group. In this primary group, who are all the users are available, all the users are going to have these permissions. So that's the representation of a user and group mapping with the primary group especially. But maybe the user can have it two or more groups or one or more groups, but one primary group. And that primary group is going to help him whenever he creates any files or folders. Yeah, that's about the GAD option, understanding. Next, after that, comment field. So first attribute user ID, second attribute the password, which is in the encrypted format, but normally passwords which will be stored in the etc shadow file. Third attribute user ID. So we're talking about it user ID, but user IDs, we have the two types of the user IDs, system user IDs and login user IDs. Login user ID should be greater than 999 and system user IDs that is less than 1000. System accounts only internal, you cannot use it to run the commands remotely. Login users first, if you like to manage any service, we will log in with login user And then we'll switch to that service account and to manage the services. And fourth attribute, what we are talking this in the user section is GID. That GID is the primary group ID. But where all the groups are managing that is, so that it is going to store it in the etc group file. Total 3 files which we discussed. etc password file, etc shadow file, another one is etc login.definitions file, and the fourth file is etc group file. So these are all the files which belong to that user database. What are the files we are talking that? Let me quickly list it. etc password, which contains all the users information. Next file is etc shadow, which contains passwords of the users in encrypted format. Next file is, which we are talking that in etc login.definitions file. This contains about the definitions. While creating a user, it is going to take that all the default settings from this file about user IDs or system system user IDs or password, the minimum duration, maximum durations, and the home directory that do you want to create it or not. There are some settings which have been defined. This is one more file. And another file where that all the groups information that is stored is, that is a group file, which contains all the groups information. So all these files which are helping in the users management. How to create a user or how to delete a user? That is a straightforward commands. That commands I will share the video which you can refer that. But whenever you create a user, where the users are storing that. Whenever you set the password, where the password is storing that. Or where that the system level user definitions have been defined about that. No login definitions or login definitions. How do you identify that user? Is it a system user ID or is it a login user ID? Or once if you know that user information, that user is belong to that, what is the primary group? What is the optional groups or secondary groups? How do you know that? Are you following the point? Commands, okay, how to create a user with all these options? I will share it one forum link and you can refer those commands. Useradd command, userdel command, usermodify command. So straightforward commands. But first, if you know this information, okay, if you're going to create a user, is it a login user or non-login user? Which one do you want that? And what is that login ID? And what is the password? And do you want to create a home directory or not? If it is created, yes, where do you want to create it? Default where that is going to creating that. And what is the comment information? Yeah, if you know this information, whenever you are working with the Ansible, it is easy. So commands, okay. So if you are working on the Linux system, useradd command which will use it. But if you are going to use it as tomorrow shell script, you should know the Linux commands. But if you are going to use the Ansible, you should know these concepts required. Okay, if I'm creating user, what is the type of the shell? I need to define it. Why do I need to define the type of the shell? Or how do I specify the primary group? Or how do I specify the secondary group? What is the difference between the primary group specification and secondary group specifications? Yes, if we define the primary group, if he is creating any file or directory, that group permissions will be applied. The primary group, which group he belongs to that, all the users are going to have those permissions on the file. That is the permissions level ID is a different, right? Primary group and secondary group. Is what are the primary group that he belongs to that? Primary group is the permission that will be allowed. That will be set up there. Yeah, comment field, this is a straightforward field, no a big deal of this. Typically contain the user's full name. And in the case of a system or application account, the system or application account, it often contains what the account is used for that. Suppose, especially if you observe that Jenkins user etc password file for the Jenkins user, it is defined some description, Jenkins automation software. And for the Apache service, whenever we install Apache service, this user is created. We didn't create it explicitly. And what is the comment it is defined? Apache. Yeah, so it is going to helping that describing about that user as a comment information. It may contain additional information like your phone number or the email ID. If you need that additional information, you can add. So, and finally, home directory. Upon login in the user is placed in the home directory, right? By default, whenever we log into the system, so that user home directory, whatever it is defined, that is the default prompt we will get it. If that directory does not exist, if that user home directory does not exist, but you are trying to log into that, then it will be placed in the root folder. Yeah, that is a home directory. And the shell, as we are talking about it, the type of the shell is very, very important to differentiate it. Is it a system account or login account? Yeah, the shell will be executed when a user logs in. Is whenever the user is logged in, which type of the shell is defined as per the type of the shell, the commands which are going to use a syntax format. But we have the different types of the shells. I will talk it in the shell scripting. With the examples, we have some options. I will talk it there. But for the timing, bin bash, born again shell, we will call it that. The shell does not have to be a shell. Yeah, so the shell does not have to be a shell. It can be Python program also. Python type of the shell also you can use it. I'll talk it all these types of the shells. I'll come to prevent interactive use of an active account. Yes, as we're talking about it, system accounts. They cannot, I mean, those accounts we cannot use it for the login purpose. We can use it only for internal service management. Use type of the shell whenever you're creating a user has been no login or bin false as a the shell. If you define that no login or bin false to prevent interactive using of an account. Interactive, you cannot use it that account, and it can be only internal to manage the service. It can be used. Yeah, that is the type of the shell which is going to be helpful. And etc shadow file. This is the format. Next file. I mean, so far which we discussed etc password file. Next another file which we have to see is etc shadow file. Shadow file contain the password information. Username is a password, and when he has changed the last password. Yeah, there is a this is from the days since January 1st, 1970 onwards. It is going to calculating that, and it is going to give that number when the password has been changed. And minimum number of days. That is the next attribute. This is minimum number of days required between the password. Already we are observing all these properties in the login definitions file, right? Yeah, whenever you are setting the password, yes, by default all these settings that is going to apply. The minimum number of days required between the password changes. Suppose especially banking accounts, if you are accessing that, so after 30 days or the 45 days, we get the notification. Password is going to expire in so and so days. Yes, please reset the password. Yeah, minimum days that is required to change it. Not maximum days. The maximum number of days the password is valid. Okay, so after 30 days it starts, the minimum days. And you need to define that in the maximum like 45 days. That means next to 15 days you need to change the password. Yeah, minimum days, maximum days, warning, the number of days before the password is going to expire. And inactive, the number of days after the password expires, the account will be disabled. If it's not going to reset the password and password has been expired, and after expiring the password, the account will be inactive and expired. Yeah, so there are like a set of attributes which are storing in the etc shadow file. So far we are understanding etc password file, and second file is etc shadow file. Yeah, so that's about important database files. It's etc password, etc shadow, and etc group. Whenever you create a groups or delete a groups or update a groups, yes, that is going to store it in etc group. Whenever you create a user, that is user add. Whenever you delete a user or whenever you modify the user, which file is getting updated is that is etc password. And if you set the password to the user, then which file is getting that update backend is that is etc shadow file. Just which are observing that this file, which contain the password related minimum days, maximum days, warning days, active or inactive. And you can change the password and you can change the shell for user. So change the shell. So default initial which are defined bin bash, but I don't want to use it that user for login purpose. That means I would like to convert that user as a system user account. Yes, we can change the type of the shell. And if you would like to know the complete details of that, the password and all the status information, chase command. Yeah, so there are some comments. I'll share the video which has been explained that all these are comments. You just refer it and try to work with that. Yeah, user add, these are all the options. And creating a password or account information. So in the etc password, we can get all the details, right? And user add with the group. Yes, primary group, how to specify? Secondary groups, how to define it? Primary group to define that hyphen small g, which we use it while creating user or modifying that user. Hyphen g for the small primary user for primary group, and caps g that is for optional or secondary groups. Yeah, so system or application accounts, how to define it? That is a password. I mean, the shell type as a user has been no login, right? So while creating the user account, you can specify that hyphen yes option. Yeah, all these things that I have been explained in the video, you just go ahead and work with that. You will get all this information. Yeah, user add, user del. Yeah, deleting that user or user mod, modifying that. Yes, adding the comment information or group information or shell types. You can use it user mod command. User add, user del, user modify. But whenever you are running these commands, what are the attributes you are going to specify? Yes, comment information or primary group information or secondary group information or shell type information. Yeah, whatever we discuss those attributes will specify that with arguments. Hyphen C comment, hyphen G group, that is a primary group. And hyphen caps C, that is optional groups. Or hyphen S, that is a shell type. Yeah, another file we are talking about it is a group, which contains the group information. And you can add the group, you can delete the group, and you can remove the group. That is a group add command, group add and a group name. And a group del, that is a group del and group name, that is going to delete the group. There are straightforward commands. You can just run it and you can practice it. I'll share this one video which has been demonstrated all these things. But knowing that the user information, this is required for the DevOps engineer. But commands, yes, if you're going to work with the shell scripting, commands required. But if you're going to work with the Ansible, concepts required. Simple. Is it clear these points? I'll share this forum link which contains all these commands. So the overall around user add, user related 3 commands, password related 2 commands, password changing and checking the details of the password, the change command. and a group related 3 or 4 commands. There is a group add, group delete, group modify. So 7 or 8 commands around you will be having, and those database files backend. etc password file, etc shadow file, etc group file, and etc definition file, login definition file. There are some 4 or 5 files, important files, which belong to the users relay. If you know these concepts, yes, more enough, which is required for the DevOps. But try to practice one time the user commands also, user adding or group adding. And how do I send that user to the group with the small g or caps G, the difference. Just try to refer those commands. I will share that one forum link today. Yeah, that's about the important concepts which are required for the DevOps we need from the Linux system point of view. But we have some disk related also. I will talk it that during, I mean, AWS, whenever we are working with the volumes, some disk related, some commands, I will explain it. But for the timing, yes, if you're good with that process management, package management, service management, networking commands, users management commands, and the files and the folders management commands with the grep options, find options, and yeah, copying that under tar options, copying the files and deleting the files, and environment variable that is understanding, aliases understanding, cron tabs mechanism understanding. Yeah, this is the overall concepts which are required for the DevOps we need from the Linux.